The ink stain had been on his thumb for so long, he no longer noticed it. Thomas sat at his desk in the records office, the morning light filtering through windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. His hand moved across the ledger with the same precision it had maintained for 12 years. The numbers aligned, the columns balanced, everything in its place. He had arrived before dawn again, not because anyone asked him to. The building was empty at that hour, the hallways silent except for the sound of his footsteps on the worn wooden floors. He preferred it this way. No interruptions, no questions. Just the work, steady and endless. The other clerks would arrive at 8. They would nod at him without speaking, already absorbed in their own tasks. His supervisor would pass by his desk once, maybe twice, glancing at the neat rows of figures without comment. At noon, Thomas would eat bread and cheese at his desk while the others gathered in the common room. He had stopped joining them years ago. There was too much to do. The work itself had changed little over the years. New ledgers replaced old ones. Different names appeared in the columns, but the essential nature of it remained constant. Numbers needed recording, documents needed filing, orders needed processing. The office ran on precision, and Thomas had made himself indispensable to that precision, or so he believed. It was a Tuesday when he noticed his hands shaking, not violently, just a slight tremor as he reached for the next document. He paused, holding his hand steady against the desk until it stopped. Then he continued working. The tremor returned the next day, and the day after that. Thomas began waking in the night, his mind already calculating figures, already worrying about the work left undone. He would lie in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift as his neighbors began their days. By the time he rose, his body felt heavy, as though he had been carrying stones through his sleep. He said nothing about it. Who would he tell? His supervisor barely acknowledged his presence. The other clerks kept to themselves. His landlady cared only that the rent arrived on time. Thomas had built his life around the work, and the work asked no questions. One morning he found a mistake in his calculations. A small error, easily corrected, but it troubled him. He had not made such a mistake in years. He checked his other ledgers, searching for similar failures. He found 2 more. Minor discrepancies, nothing that would cause harm. But they were there, unmistakable evidence of his declining attention. He worked later that evening, rechecking every entry from the past month. The building grew dark around him. The cleaning woman arrived and departed without disturbing him. When he finally left, the streets were empty, the lamps casting long shadows across the cobblestones. The pattern continued. More mistakes appeared, despite his increased hours. His hands shook more frequently. The numbers blurred on the pages. He began to feel a pressure in his chest, a tightness that made breathing difficult. Still, he said nothing. He simply worked harder, arrived earlier, stayed later. Then came the afternoon when his supervisor placed a new clerk at the desk beside his own. A young man, fresh-faced and eager. "Show him the filing system," his supervisor said, already turning away. Thomas looked at the young man's unmarked hands, his clear eyes, his straight posture. Something in his chest tightened further. He taught the young man the basics: how to organize the documents, how to check the figures, how to maintain the ledgers. The young man learned quickly, asking few questions, nodding with understanding. By the end of the week, he was working independently. Thomas found himself with less to do. Some of the routine tasks were quietly reassigned. His desk, once central to the office's operations, seemed to recede into the background. No one announced the shift. It simply happened, like water finding a new path. He responded by working even harder on the tasks that remained. He double-checked everything. He volunteered for additional projects. He stayed at his desk through lunch, through the evening, sometimes until the cleaning woman arrived to sweep the floors. "You should go home," she said one night, glancing at him with something that might have been concern or might have been mere observation. "Soon," he replied, not looking up from his work. But he didn't go home. He sat at his desk staring at the ledger before him and realized he could not remember what he had been doing. The numbers seemed meaningless, just marks on paper. His vision blurred. His hands trembled so badly he had to set down his pen. For the first time in 12 years, Thomas left work before completing his assigned tasks. He walked through the dark streets without direction, his feet carrying him past his usual route home. The city moved around him, people returning to their families, shops closing for the night, lamps being lit in windows. He had rarely noticed these things before. His thoughts had always been consumed by the work waiting for him the next day. Now walking with no destination, he began to notice other things. The way the baker locked his shop door, the satisfaction visible in his tired movements. The way a woman greeted a child running toward her, scooping the small figure into her arms. The way two men stood talking on a corner, their laughter carrying across the street. Simple moments, ordinary connections, things that happened every day while he sat at his desk, bent over his ledgers, maintaining perfect columns in an office where no one noticed perfection anymore. He found himself at the river's edge, watching the dark water move past. The current was strong, relentless, indifferent to the boats and bridges and lives that intersected with it. It simply flowed, following the only path available to it. Thomas thought about the 12 years, the early mornings, the late evenings, the meals eaten alone, the weekends spent reviewing work, the holidays passed in the empty office. He had given everything to the precision of those ledgers, to the maintenance of that system. And what had it given him in return? Not recognition, not advancement, not even job security, as the arrival of the young clerk had quietly demonstrated. He had believed his dedication made him valuable, irreplaceable. But the office had already begun replacing him. It would continue without him, just as the river continued regardless of what stood on its banks. He could return tomorrow, continue working harder, stay later, arrive earlier, sacrifice more sleep, more health, more of whatever remained of his life. Perhaps the trembling would stop. Perhaps the mistakes would cease. Perhaps he would prove himself indispensable again. Or perhaps he would simply wear himself down further until even the routine tasks became impossible, until his replacement was complete, until there was nothing left of him but the ink stains on his fingers. The question wasn't what the office would do. The office would continue regardless. The question was what he would do, what he could still choose. He stood at the river's edge for a long time, feeling the night air on his face, listening to the water. The tightness in his chest had not disappeared. The tremor in his hands had not ceased. But something else had shifted, something harder to name. The next morning, Thomas arrived at his usual hour. He worked through his assigned tasks with the same precision he had always maintained. But when the clock struck 6, he set down his pen. He organized his desk. He put on his coat. The young clerk looked up as Thomas passed his desk. "Leaving early?" "On time," Thomas replied. He walked home through the evening streets, following the same route he had walked the night before. The baker was closing his shop again. The woman was waiting for her child again. The two men were gone, but others stood in their place, talking and laughing. Thomas felt the weight of his body, the fatigue in his muscles, the persistent tremor in his hands. These were real. They existed independent of his will. He could not simply decide to be less tired, to be less damaged by the years of sacrifice. But he could decide how he spent what remained. The work would continue without him, whether he gave it everything or only what was appropriate. The office would replace him, whether he destroyed himself trying to prevent it or accepted it with dignity. These outcomes existed beyond his control. What he controlled was simpler. Whether he arrived on time or too early, whether he left on time or too late, whether he ate lunch alone at his desk or with other people, whether he spent his evenings staring at ledgers or walking by the river. Small choices, Unremarkable choices, but they were his to make. Thomas climbed the stairs to his room. He ate a simple dinner. He sat by his window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow he would return to work. He would perform his duties with care. And when the day ended, he would leave. The tightness in his chest remained. The tremor in his hands persisted. These things might never fully heal, but they would not be made worse by his choices. Not anymore. Outside, the city settled into night. Somewhere the river continued its patient movement toward the sea. And in his small room, Thomas sat in the quiet, no longer counting the hours until morning, no longer calculating what tomorrow's work might demand. For now there was only this moment, and this moment required nothing from him but presence. He closed his eyes and felt the weight of his body in the chair. Real, present, his own. That would have to be enough.